This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon. We're coming back on the air because President Biden is about to address the nation concerning the historic Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe versus Wade. Let's listen to the president at the White House.
A right so important to so many Americans, but they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country. 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade was decided and has been the law of the land since then. This landmark case protected a woman's right to choose, her right to make intensely personal decisions with her doctor, free from the interference of politics. It reaffirmed basic principles of equality, that women have the power to control their own destiny, and it reinforced a fundamental right of privacy, the right of each of us to choose how to live our lives. Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. As chairman and ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as vice president and now as president of the United States, I've studied this case carefully. I've overseen more Supreme Court confirmations than anyone today, where this case was always discussed. I believe Roe v. Wade was the correct decision as a matter of constitutional law and application of the fundamental right to privacy and liberty in matters of family and personal autonomy. It was a decision on a complex matter that drew a careful balance between a woman's right to choose earlier in her pregnancy and the state's ability to regulate later in her pregnancy. A decision with broad national consensus that most Americans of faith and backgrounds found acceptable, and that had been the law of the land for most of the lifetime of Americans today. And it was a constitutional principle upheld by justices appointed by Democrat and Republican presidents alike. Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision, written by a justice appointed by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. In the 5 decades that followed Roe v. Wade, justices appointed by Republican presidents from Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan, George W. Bush, were among the justices who voted to uphold the principles set forth in Roe v. Wade. It was 3 justices named by one president, Donald Trump, who were the core of today's decision to upend the scales of justice and eliminate a fundamental right for women in this country. Make no mistake, this decision is a culmination of a deliberate effort over decades to upset the balance of our law. It's a realization of an extreme ideology and a tragic error by the Supreme Court, in my view. The court has done what it has never done before, expressly take away a constitutional right that is so fundamental to so many Americans that had already been recognized. The court's decision to do so will have real and immediate consequences. State laws banning abortion are automatically taking effect today, jeopardizing the health of millions of women, some without exceptions. So extreme that women could be punished for protecting their health. So extreme that women and girls who are forced to bear their rapist's child, with the child a consequence. It just stuns me. So extreme that doctors will be criminalized for fulfilling their duty to care. Imagine having a young woman have to carry the child of incest as a consequence of incest. No option. Too often the case. The poor women are going to be hit the hardest. It's cruel. In fact, the court laid out state laws criminalizing abortion that go back to the 1800s as rationale. The court literally taking America back 150 years. This is a sad day for the country, in my view. But it doesn't mean the fight's over. Let me be very clear and unambiguous. The only way we can secure a woman's right to choose, and the balance that existed, is for Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade as federal law. No executive action from the president can do that. And if Congress, as it appears, lacks the votes to do that now, voters need to make their voices heard. This fall, we must elect more senators and representatives who will codify women's right to choose into federal law once again. Elect more state leaders to protect this right at the local level. We need to restore the protections of Roe as law of the land. We need to elect officials who will do that. This fall, Roe is on the ballot. Personal freedoms are on the ballot. The right to privacy, liberty, equality, they're all on the ballot. Until then, I will do all of my power to protect a woman's right in states where they will face the consequences of today's decision. While the court's decision cast a dark shadow over a large swath of the land, many states in this country still recognize a woman's right to choose. So, if a woman lives in a state that restricts abortion, the Supreme Court's decision does not prevent her from traveling from her home state to the state that allows it. It does not prevent a doctor in that state from treating her. As the Attorney General has made clear, women must remain free to travel safely to another state to seek care they need. My administration will defend that bedrock right. If any state or local official, high or low, tries to interfere with a woman's exercising her basic right to travel, I will do everything in my power to fight that deeply un-American attack. My administration will also protect a woman's access to medications that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, like contraception, which is essential for preventative health care, mifepristone, which the FDA approved 20 years ago to safely end early pregnancies and is commonly used to treat miscarriages. Some states are saying that they'll try to ban or severely restrict access to these medications. But extremist governors and state legislators are looking to block the mail or search a person's medicine cabinet or control a woman's actions by tracking data on her apps she uses are wrong and extreme and out of touch with the majority of Americans. The American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists wrote to me and Vice President Harris stressing that these laws are not based on evidence and asking us to act to protect access to care. They say by limiting access to these medicines, maternal mortality will climb in America. That's what they say. Today, I'm directing the Department of Health and Human Services to take steps to ensure these critical medications are available to the fullest extent possible. And the politicians cannot interfere in the decisions that should be made between a woman and her doctor. And my administration will remain vigilant as the implications of this decision play out. I've warned about how this decision risks the broader right to privacy for everyone. That's because Roe recognized the fundamental right to privacy that has served as a basis for so many more rights that we've come to take for granted, that are ingrained in the fabric of this country. The right to make the best decisions for your health. The right to use birth control, a married couple in the privacy of their bedroom, for God's sake. The right to marry the person you love. Now, Justice Thomas said as much today. He explicitly called to reconsider the right of marriage equality, the right of couples to make their choices on contraception. This is the extreme and dangerous path the court is now taking us on. Let me close with 2 points. First, I call on everyone, no matter how deeply they care about this decision, to keep all protests peaceful Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable. Threats and intimidation are not speech. We must stand against violence in any form, regardless of your rationale. Second, I know so many of us are frustrated and disillusioned that the court has taken something away that's so fundamental. I know so many women are now going to face incredibly difficult situations. I hear you. I support you. I stand with you. The consequences and the consensus of the American people, core principles of equality, liberty, dignity, and the stability of the rule of law demand that Roe should not have been overturned. With this decision, the conservative majority of the Supreme Court shows how extreme it is, how far removed they are from the majority of this country. They've made the United States an outlier among developed nations in the world. But this decision must not be the final word. My administration will use all of its appropriate lawful powers, but Congress must act. And with your vote, you can act. You can have the final word. This is not over. Thank you very much. More to say this in weeks to come. Thank you.
President Biden at the White House responding to the history made on this day, the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, a woman's right to choose, and turning that decision back to the states to decide whether or not a woman can choose her own future. The president saying this is a fundamental right to privacy that had broad national consensus. It had been the law of the land for 50 years, upheld by justices appointed by both Democrats and Republican presidents. He pointed to 3 justices appointed by Donald Trump, who he said were at the center of this decision after decades of precedent. He called it a tragic error. He said this decision looked back at legal theory from the 1800s. He said literally taking America back more than 100 years to come up with this decision. He talked about how extreme it is, in his words, that women can be punished for making a choice on their own. He pivoted to the election, the midterms approaching. He said voters need to make their voices heard this fall, not only on the national level when it comes to the Senate, and elect more Democrats. He was making the case for in the Senate, if you want to protect this choice, to elect more state leaders who will protect this right. He said, make no mistake, this fall, Roe is on the ballot. Personal freedom is on the ballot. And he also talked about how this could go even beyond Roe versus Wade and a woman's right to choose. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. The president making it very clear this will be a defining issue of the midterm, Cecilia.
David, he did. He said that, but you know, I've got to point out, leading up to this, in the recent weeks since this draft opinion was leaked, there were emergency meetings at the White House with advocacy groups and lawyers and White House officials. He called on the Gender Policy Council, the White House counsel's office. They'd been gathering all together in these closed-door meetings, trying to come up with a plan. There was never a consensus that the White House could executive order their way out of this, but there had been a lot of discussion about plans, that potential things that they could do in some of these red states where women would be affected immediately, those 13 states where these trigger laws are now taking effect. But you didn't really hear the president talk about any of that. And I think a lot of progressives and a lot of pro-choice people in this country are certainly looking at this White House, and to particularly this president, for some bold executive action. Not that any of that would restore the rights of Roe, but certainly get a little closer to offer some protections that potentially they could do. And that did not come out of the president just now. He mentioned that he really wants Congress to codify Roe versus Wade. Now, what that means is essentially Congress would guarantee abortion access nationwide. Look, it passed in the House, but it failed in the Senate just last month. They have basically moved past that. There is no chance that Congress is going to codify Roe versus Wade anytime soon. So you scrap that. Then you heard the president say that perhaps DHS could make abortion pills more readily available to women around the country. Certainly, I think a lot of pro-choice people would feel like that is going to help in some situations. But, you know, you also had advocates say that they wanted to hear this White House perhaps go beyond that to see if funding can be made available in an emergency way to help women get transportation to these states outside of theirs where access is no longer allowed, to perhaps use federal buildings to allow abortion providers to perform services in states where this is not allowed. But you didn't hear any of that from this president today, David, and I think a lot of folks in the progressive side of his party are going to be wondering if he, in fact, is the one who is going to be able to lead this fight on abortion rights heading into the midterms in November.
Cecilia Vega, following this reaction from the president to the Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe versus Wade. Cecilia, thank you. You heard President Biden there speak of 3 justices appointed by the former president, Donald Trump. He said who were at the center of this decision making, who helped drive this, in so many words, he said. We do have reaction from former President Trump, not to President Biden, but to the ruling. Former President Trump saying a short time before we came back on the air here, when asked whether he feels he played a role in the reversal of Roe versus Wade after having appointed 3 conservative justices to the high court, the former President Trump told Fox News, God made the decision. So when asked if he played a role in this reversal, he said, God made the decision. I want to bring in Rachel Scott. She's in front of the Supreme Court where she has been since this decision was handed down several hours ago. And what's the status of the crowds there? We can see that they are still quite significant.
They are, David. D.C. is on high alert as the crowds out here continue to grow. Just take a look behind me. We are seeing the response to this decision minute by minute. We are seeing the crowds out in front of the Supreme Court here grow. And when the decision initially came out, we did see people on both sides of this issue gather out here outside of the Supreme Court. But within the last 30 minutes, we have really seen this start to change. Outrage is spilling over here. These people behind me say this feels like a gut punch to them. They have been out here for weeks. I met people as far away as Florida, Ohio, who told me after that leaked draft opinion came out, they traveled here to Washington, D.C. They have been protesting here every single day, trying to send a message to the justices on the bench. Now they say where they are standing right now is extremely intentional because not only are they in front of the Supreme Court, they are also in front of the United States Capitol. They say their message now turns to lawmakers. They want them to codify Roe versus Wade, but as Cecilia mentioned, there is absolutely no appetite for that among Republicans over on the Capitol, David.
Interesting you bring that point up about making it a federal law, Roe versus Wade. Rachel, stick with us for the follow-up here because you have covered this on the Hill repeatedly. You've questioned pro-choice Republican senators, including Susan Collins. She's just out with a statement, and I wanted to get your reaction, Rachel. Susan Collins, pro-choice Republican from Maine, has said that this decision is inconsistent with what Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh said in their testimony and in their meetings with me, where they both were insistent on the importance of supporting long-standing precedents that the country has relied on, seeming to imply that they indicated to her that Roe versus Wade was precedent and that it was important to support long-standing precedent in this country. Now we've seen that they have not, and she knows there is significant heat coming her way now.
Make no mistake about it. I am told that she is.
Rachel Scott's live reporting, freezing there. That is the way television goes on these live events. We'll go back to her as soon as we can. I want to bring in Mary Bruce live outside the White House. Mary, we can pick up that thought with you, actually. Susan Collins, you heard that statement she's just issued, one of the pro-choice Republicans who will feel heat because she said publicly, after having met with some of former President Trump's choices for the court, saying she was confident that they would uphold Roe versus Wade. They have not done so. She now says they were inconsistent. What their decision is inconsistent with what they had indicated to her.
Yeah, she took them at their word that they were going to uphold this right, and clearly that is not the case. And I think she will be getting a lot of political heat for this, and she knows that. I think she was not pleased, obviously, when the draft opinion came out, and knows the amount of heat that she is going to face going forward. And David, I have to tell you, I was just in the room with the president. I cannot remember the last time I saw him this angry, frustrated, and quite frankly sad. That gut punch that Rachel was talking about, you can tell the president feels that as well. In the room were many of his female staffers hugging each other, consoling each other, well aware of the fight ahead here. You heard the president outline some of the steps that he wants to take, but he is well aware of his limitations here, that anything he does won't have a huge sweeping impact. It certainly may have an impact, but it also will likely be caught up in a lot of litigation, and that is why the focus is so squarely on these elections. The president saying Roe is on the ballot, urging Americans to make their vote count, because if anything, this decision shows that votes do matter. David.
Let's drill down, Mary. The bottom line here then, as he turns and pivots to the midterm saying Roe is on the ballot. The Democrats would need 60 votes in the Senate, and then they would need to hold on to their majority in the House in order to ever be able to make Roe versus Wade federal law.
And David, we know that that is a tall order. Democrats are very concerned about how the midterms are shaping up for them. And it is going to take a lot to get enough Democrats in office to codify Roe into law, which is what the president is calling for. But right now, that will be the best chance to have any real lasting permanent impact on this. And the president was really blunt, right, in saying that he never before has the court, in his view, fundamentally stripped away what he says is a constitutional right. And you heard us there at the end shouting, asking, is he still confident in the court? David, he wouldn't say.
Mary Bruce, live at the White House. Mary, our thanks to you as always. I want to bring in Terry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for years for us here on ABC. Terry, we were on the air earlier talking about these 13 states with trigger laws that go into effect almost immediately. We know Missouri, their ban has already gone into effect. We know in Alabama, the governor there says they will work to get that ban into effect immediately. And these 13 states among 26 states, more than half the country, expected to move and move quickly on this historic decision from the court.
Absolutely, David. As of today, women in America occupy a different station in our society. In much of the country today, as you just outlined, and more to come, women will have a completely different relationship to the choices they make of their own bodies when they are pregnant. In other parts of the country, they will continue to have those choices. That's why the battleground is not necessarily in the Congress, although the president will try to lead the Democrats to a midterm victory, which right now seems far away. And if anything, if the Republicans take over, there will be Republican members of Congress who introduce bills to ban abortion by federal law nationwide. But the real battleground is going to be in the states. And there, as in the Republican Party at large, there is a kind of ratchet toward more extreme laws. For a Republican to oppose a law, for example, that would outlaw abortion entirely from the beginning and criminalize women who choose it, those laws will be introduced. There's no question about it, and it'll be difficult for many Republicans to vote against them.
And so we'll be watching that at the state level. In the meantime, one last question for you, Terry, before we go here, because the bigger issue also coming out of this, and you heard the president mention this, the president says the court has now shown how extreme it is and that it's far removed from the majority of the American people. And Terry, you well know the polling just as recently as a couple of days ago from Quinnipiac, not long before that from Pew, showing more than 60% of Americans believe that this is should be a woman's choice, and the ABC News polling, which was even higher than that, saying this is a private choice between a woman and her doctor, the court not reflecting what we're seeing in the polling.
No, the justices who found and overruled Roe, found this ruling and overruled Roe, would say, well, you can exercise those opinions in your state legislatures and localities. What this court is demonstrating, however, is that when it comes to what are settled law, what was thought to be settled law, as even Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch talked about Roe versus Wade, they are activist judges. These are judges who will reach out and reject decades of precedent and of the reasoning involved in order to achieve what they think are the more pure constitutional doctrines. Their reliance on the traditional conservative value of judicial restraint is very minimal. We are in a new era with a new activist court.
Terry Moran, Rachel Scott, Mary Bruce, and Cecilia Vega, my thanks to all of you. The president reacting to the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. I'll be back with the entire team a little later today for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. Good day.